Tonight, before you drift into sleep, let me take you into the silence of the Nevada desert, where secrets lie buried in the sand, and one journalist dared to uncover them. This is the story of George Knapp, and the truth behind Area 51, the SO. Desert at night is not like any other place on Earth. If you stand in Nevada, far away from the glow of the cities, the sky becomes endless. Stars hang heavy and sharp as though they are trying to remind us of just how small we really are. And beneath those same stars lies a place that has haunted the imagination of millions, a place that never appeared on maps, a place the government denied even existed. Its name, Area 51. For decades, whispers floated across the desert winds, strange lights, silent crafts that darted through the sky, technologies that no human should possess. But it was all rumor, nothing more than fireside speculation, until a man named George Knapp, a journalist from Las Vegas, listened to one voice that changed everything. That voice belonged to Bob Lazar. It was the late 1980s. America was still caught in the long shadow of the Cold War. Military secrecy was expected, and questioning it was dangerous. But when George Knapp first heard Lazar's claims, he knew this was no ordinary story. Lazar described working at a site called S4, near the boundaries of Area 51. He spoke of 9 craft, each of them saucer-shaped, hidden in hangars carved into the desert mountainside. He claimed these craft were not built on Earth. The idea was staggering. If it was true, it meant the U.S. government was studying alien technology. If it was false, it meant Lazar was risking everything for a lie that brought him nothing but danger. George listened. And in 1989, he gave Lazar a platform, a broadcast that shook the world. At first, Lazar's face was hidden, his voice altered, but his words cut through the static of disbelief. He described the way the craft moved, effortlessly bending. Gravity, ignoring the rules of motion as we understood them. He explained the propulsion system, something so advanced that our science had no name for it. For the first time, the world heard whispers of Area 51, not as rumor, but as testimony. The government denied it all. Lazar's records, his schooling, his employment, seemed to vanish overnight. Skeptics dismissed him, saying he was a fraud. But George Knapp remained steady. He didn't insist Lazar was right. He didn't declare him wrong. He simply said, "Listen, because the desert has a way of keeping secrets. But sometimes, those secrets echo louder than silence." After the first broadcast, something shifted. People began to come forward. Witnesses who had lived in the shadow of the restricted zone told of glowing orbs hovering silently above the mountains. Former employees hinted at experiments and technologies far beyond anything we could imagine. George collected their voices like fragments of a puzzle that refused to fit together. And soon, the puzzle became bigger than one man's story. In the years that followed, George continued to dig. He interviewed those who claimed they were harassed after speaking out. He listened to families who swore their phones were tapped, who felt eyes following them in the night. He studied reports of lights in the sky, witnessed by multiple people, all describing the same impossible movements. With every step, the picture of Area 51 grew stranger. Imagine yourself standing on the edge of that desert. The night is silent, the air thin and cool. You see a light rise over the mountains. At first you think it's a plane, but then it tilts at an angle no plane could survive. It darts, stops, reverses direction without a sound. And then, as if mocking your disbelief, it disappears in an instant. This is what countless witnesses described. And these were the same skies under which George Knapp built his story. By the 1990s, Area 51 was no longer invisible. Thanks to George, it entered public consciousness. Hollywood films placed it at the center of alien myths. Talk shows debated its secrets. People began driving into the desert, hoping for a glimpse of the impossible. What was once denied now lived in the collective imagination of a generation. But the attention brought danger. The more George reported, the more resistance he faced. Some sources vanished, others withdrew, too afraid to continue. And George himself became a target of skepticism. To many, he was simply the UFO guy. But unlike others who chased fame or money, George never exaggerated, never sensationalized. He remained calm, grounded, professional. And that's what made his work powerful, because, beneath the noise, the evidence continued to build. Years later, in 2013, the government finally admitted what had been denied for so long. Yes, Area 51 was real. Documents confirmed its existence. Maps showed its boundaries. But the official story claimed it was only for testing aircraft, spy planes, stealth bombers, advanced but terrestrial machines. And yet, the testimonies George collected refused to fit neatly into that explanation. People hadn't seen stealth bombers. They'd seen craft without wings, without engines, without sound, machines that didn't just fly. They moved in ways that seemed impossible. Were these simply misidentified prototypes? Or were they proof of something far greater? The desert never gave answers. It only gave whispers. And George Knapp kept listening. The government's reluctant admission in 2013 should have ended the debate. Area 51 was real, but it was only about planes, about testing, about national security. At least, that was the official line. But for George Knapp, and for those who had listened to him since 1989, the admission raised more questions than it answered. Because if the government could deny the very existence of a place for decades, what else could they deny? And if they could erase records, intimidate witnesses, and silence voices, what kind of truth required that much protection? As George followed the trail, he began to realize that the story of Area 51 was not just about alien craft or secret technologies. It was about the nature of secrecy itself. It was about power, because power thrives on silence. And Area 51 had taught the world that silence could be weaponized. The desert became a mirror. Every rumor, every unexplained light, every missing record reflected back at us the possibility that reality itself was not what we had been told. For some, that thought was thrilling. For others, terrifying. But either way, the story refused to die. In late-night interviews, George often spoke with quiet calmness, as if the desert had seeped into his voice. He would describe the fear in the eyes of men who had worked near the base, the way their hands shook when they spoke of machines that didn't belong here. He would recall phone calls that ended abruptly, visits that never happened, conversations cut short by silence. And yet, he never shouted. He never declared the truth as absolute. He simply allowed the mystery to speak for itself. Because sometimes, the absence of answers is louder than any proof. As the years went on, Area 51 became more than a secret base. It became a symbol of mistrust between the people and their government, a symbol of the possibility that we are not alone. And for George Knapp, a symbol of journalism's greatest responsibility, to ask the questions others are too afraid to ask. The story branched into new directions. There was Skinwalker Ranch, another chapter of George's work, where witnesses described phenomena that seemed to defy reality: strange creatures, portals, lights in the sky. There was the Pentagon's secret UFO program, uncovered years later, that proved even the highest levels of government were still chasing answers to the same questions Lazar had raised decades earlier. And through it all, the same thread remained: silence, denial, shadows. But here is where the story becomes more unsettling. Think for a moment about how secrets survive. They do not survive because they are never told. They survive because they are told just enough to confuse, to distract, to divide. For every witness, there is a skeptic. For every testimony, there is ridicule. And in the noise, the truth becomes unreachable. Perhaps this is the greatest trick of all. Not hiding the truth, but burying it in so many contradictions that we no longer know what to believe. And yet, George Knapp never gave up. He remained steady, his voice a calm guide through the noise. He never promised answers. He only promised the questions mattered. As you lie here tonight, listening to this story, ask yourself, what would it mean if Bob Lazar was right? What would it mean if the craft hidden at S4 were real? If gravity itself had been bent and broken by technology not of this earth, would it mean we are not alone? Or would it mean something even more disturbing? That our governments have held the key to a new world, a new future, and chosen to keep it for themselves. The desert remains silent. The stars remain endless. And still, the questions linger. Why? Would a man risk everything to tell a story that brought him nothing but pain? Why would a journalist like George Knapp spend decades chasing whispers if there was nothing there? Why, after so many years, does Area 51 still hold our imagination in its grip? The truth may be stranger than any of us can imagine. And perhaps that is why the desert guards it so closely. George's story is not about proving aliens exist. It is not about convincing you of Bob Lazar's every word. It is about something far more human, the courage to ask and the courage to listen. Because in a world where silence is safer, speaking becomes an act of defiance. And George Knapp defied the silence. So tonight, as your eyes grow heavy and your breath slows, remember this: the Nevada desert does not sleep. The stars above it do not forget. And somewhere, beyond the fences and the hangars, beyond the denials and the lies, the truth waits. Waiting for the moment when silence finally breaks. And when that day comes, when the whispers become undeniable, we may find that the truth behind Area 51 was never about the desert at all. It was about us. About whether we are ready to know. About whether we can handle what has been hidden. And about whether we will finally accept that sometimes the shadows hold more than fear. Sometimes the shadows hold the future.